I'd like to thank everyone who came in person today, all of you, as well as the hundreds more tuning in online for this afternoon of critical, difficult, but hopefully hopeful and empowering conversations. It's all the more important and timely, obviously, given the dramatic events of the last 24 hours. And of course, those will also loom large in our discussions as we get through the afternoon. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that here in Toronto, we are on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and that this is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. I also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Those of you who are joining from elsewhere in Canada and therefore sit in different Indigenous territory, I encourage you to take a moment to reflect and acknowledge this wherever you are. So, our conference today is a collaboration of 3 of Canada's leading liberal, Zionist, and progressive Israel organizations: Canadian Friends of Peace Now, JSpaceCanada, and the New Israel Fund of Canada. It's also been made possible with the help of our co-presenters, Amenu Canada, Camp Gesher of the Habanim Dror Zionist Youth Movement, Camp Shombria of the Hashomer Hatzair Zionist Youth Movement, and Meretz Canada. So last week, I exchanged messages with a friend in Jerusalem, a retired Israeli senior diplomat. It was the anniversary of October 7th, and we shared our grief and our frustration. And we also reflected on what it would take to change the present reality. Here's what she said. Nobody's responsible, sensible, bold, with a vision is leading us. Nobody that rises to the occasion. Nobody that offers a path to end this horrible war. Nobody that cares about the others. Nobody that understands that we cannot isolate ourselves from the world. Nobody that offers hope to us and our Palestinian neighbors. So sad. I exchanged another message with her yesterday that didn't seem to offer any more hope. What we've planned for you today is not about easy answers. It's about hard truths. But through this maze of these hard truths, we believe that we can find something elusive but all important, something my friend and all of us are yearning for: hope for a peaceful future that is worth fighting for. In a moment, I'll invite Ben Murain to explain what we mean by these words: hard truths, peaceful future, fighting for it. Then we'll introduce our visiting experts, who will each give us their take on the pre-October 7th landscape and how we got where we are now. After that session, you will all get to choose to attend one of 3 deep dive workshops with one of our panelists, with plenty of time for Q&A. Don't worry if you miss, if you can't decide or you want to be at all 3, they're all being recorded and you'll be able to watch any of the others later. After the workshops, we'll take a brief break over coffee and tea outside if you're here in person, before reconvening for our final panel, talking about the path to a safer, shared future for all in the region. We'll end the day with closing remarks by former Canadian Ambassador to Israel, John Allen, about what Canada and Canadians like you and us can do to help us get there. So we have an impressive diversity of people here in our audience today: Jews, Palestinians, and others neither Jewish nor Palestinian, Israelis, Canadians, and who knows who else. Longtime experts and newcomers to the issues, devoted anti-occupation activists, committed Zionists, those who oppose the occupation precisely because they are committed Zionists, and those attending today because they want to hear something different authoritative voices, or because they feel defeated by the complexity of the issues, or because they're simply curious about what others to their left or to their right are thinking. What we all have in common are a few essential ingredients for navigating these fraught and emotional topics. We're all in pain. We're all searching for better answers, not just for Israelis and Palestinians, but for ourselves in our shared home in Canada. And now it feels like the whole world is holding its collective breath. Are we on the verge of a regional war? What will happen tomorrow? What will happen this afternoon while we're sitting here talking about these things? That commonality is why, even though we are hurting, I believe each of you will be able to discuss difficult topics today with respect, with an open mind, and with a compassionate heart for our speakers and for each other. Okay, so with that, I'd like to invite Ben Murain, the Executive Director of the New Israel Fund of Canada, to set the stage for our first panel. Ben?
Hi, everyone. 6 months of unending heartbreak and fear and darkness. It's hard to believe. It was hard to believe the depravity of Hamas's massacres and sexual violence that day. It was hard to believe as we watched the numbers of hostages missing go up and up and up. It was hard to believe the images of the burned out kibbutzim and the wreckage of the Nova Music Festival, or the videos of people running. It was hard to believe 1/3 internally displaced Israelis from the north and from the Gaza envelope. It was hard to believe how quickly the Gaza death toll climbed up and up and up and up. Millions displaced. It's hard to believe that 1.7 million people are in a human-made famine. It's hard to believe that our Jewish day schools and our neighbors' mosques here in Toronto would be evacuated for bomb threats on the same day. That a window in Winnipeg would have a bullet, a Jewish home in Winnipeg would have a bullet put through it. That firebombs would be thrown outside of our Jewish institutions in Montreal. It's hard to believe that we're on the brink of a regional war. If you're like me, what has also been excruciating these past 6 months has been holding not just my pain and our pain, our Jewish pain, or pain of the Israeli people, or my Israeli colleagues, my Israeli family, holding all of it alongside the pain of the Palestinian people too. My Palestinian coworkers, my Palestinian friends, and Arab and Muslim friends. What has added salt to these open wounds has been a shocking resignation for many people that it has to be this way. We have no choice. We will live by the sword forever. Especially dispiriting has been hearing this from Israel's own leadership. That is why, amidst what feels like a hurricane of our emotions, the horrors unfolding on our phones, our nervousness to walk around in our own streets, or even just talk about this with others. That is why, even early on in the weeks immediately after October 7th, there was heard what seemed like a still small voice that said, "It doesn't have to be this way." That voice came from Israeli civil society. It's one thing for us in the diaspora to say such things, but to hear it come from them on the front lines is something else, given what they're there and living through. In fact, just for example, in the first few months, we were astounded in the middle of all of this pain to see events cropping up all over Israel of Jews and Palestinians standing together by the hundreds, holding up what has become these iconic purple signs that said simply, Bayachad, together, or we'll get through this together, or Jews and Arabs stand together. We were astounded to see Palestinian citizens of Israel visit Jewish families of the hostages. Jewish citizens visit Palestinian citizens who have a family of hostages held in Gaza. It was just unbelievable. As the war in Gaza accelerated, these Israeli voices also said that we do have choices even now. We have lots of choices in how we execute a just war justly. Israel has always had choices. In fact, the families of the hostages felt it necessary not just to ask, not just to demand, not just to protest, but to drag their own government, kicking and screaming, to the negotiating table to make a hostage deal, to take a hostage deal at any cost. Yesterday, they demonstrated in the tens of thousands, hours before an Iranian attack, saying loudly to their leadership, "We reject your choices." And as these voices have become louder, we also hear more confidently, too, these Israelis saying, we don't have to live by the sword forever. We can end this. We can make a better future. In fact, there are concrete, pragmatic, realistic steps that we can take, that our allies abroad can take to get us out of this mess. And they are saying now what Israel's closest friends are also saying. To the right, they say, there is no purely military solution. And sometimes sometimes to the left, they have to say, there are 7 million Jews and 7 million Palestinians between the river and the sea. Nobody's going anywhere. They also say, yes, we face enormous odds of people who want to kill us, but we have made mistakes. We continue to make mistakes, and we must not make more mistakes moving forward. Any solution must bring safety and dignity to both peoples, and anything else will perpetrate endless terrorism and endless occupation. I don't want more infants kidnapped from their mothers again. I don't want millions starved again. The seriousness of this task is why we are here today. We will fail to prevent more October 7ths and more Gaza wars, more sleepless nights like last night, unless we take this seriously. And the reason that the organizers of this event have brought these Israelis here to this conference today to do this work, to broadcast it live, to record it, to take these speakers also to Ottawa and to Vancouver and to Montreal, and to take them to our policymakers in the Canadian government, is to educate ourselves better about what those choices are, to demonstrate that there is a Canadian Jewish progressive constituency that supports these Israeli voices, and that our government and that our Canadian Jewish community needs to act on these things too. The past few days have reiterated the urgency of all of this. A 14-year-old Jewish boy in a West Bank settlement was abducted and murdered, and after which another settler rampage burned and terrorized nearby a Palestinian village. Israelis spent last night worrying about 330 airborne missiles and drones headed for them. Palestinians last night are still hungry. What you will hear today are some answers to those difficult questions. Did we have to go to war this way? What could we have done differently? What do we do moving forward? What is our opportunity, perhaps, to make the case that this is the moment moving forward to do some things differently. What I know you will hear today is that Israelis need our help. And yes, we will talk about Iran, we will talk about Hamas, we will talk about Hezbollah, and we will talk about what of the Palestinian Authority needs to be fixed. Our mission here and the work that we do is to represent a realistic Canadian Jewish voice for pragmatism that works deeply in partnership with Israelis to help them, given the enormity of what Israeli society is going through right now, turn their ship around to play a more productive role in ending this conflict. We don't pretend that if we do these things, this is a guarantee. We don't say that if we do these things, that Israeli action alone will solve the entire conflict. We are not naive. But part of that work is to engage with hard truths, difficult truths, if we are going to see squarely what we can and should do differently. And that there is a peaceful future that can be found, navigated through this quagmire, out the other side, to take tragedy and use this as the motivation to finally make tough choices, to put a better future for Israelis and Palestinians and ourselves and everyone else in that region, fearful of where this is going, on a better path. So I thank you for coming today. I thank you for listening with resilience to what I'm sure will be difficult things, but that I believe at the end of the day, many of us will walk out of this room. I hope you will walk out of this room for the first time seeing that there is a path. We all know it's worth fighting for, but to know that it's there, that is the purpose of this event today and the purpose of our events in Ottawa in 2 days from now, and in Vancouver and Montreal 3 days from now. Thank you for coming. Thank you for tuning in online. Linda. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ben. So if we are going to prevent a repeat of the past 6 months and of last night, we must first examine how we got here. So now I'm going to welcome our panelists to the stage for our first exploration into hard truths. Please come on. And while they're seating themselves, I just wanted to say we are aware of some imbalances in our program today, both gender imbalances and the lack of Palestinian voices, and we are always trying to do better. But we are thrilled to welcome our 4 speakers, our 4 brilliant and inspiring panelists who came here today to be with us. So first, Mauricio Lapchik is the Director of External Relations for Peace Now. Born in Uruguay, Mauricio moved to Israel in 2013 to pursue his master's in political science and comparative religion at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Peace Now, for those of you who don't know, is the largest and longest standing Israeli movement working for peace through public education and advocacy. Dr. Gil Murciano, Gil, is the CEO of the Israel-based think tank Mitvim, the Israeli Institute for Regional Foreign Policies. His dissertation analyzed the influence of honor as a factor in peace negotiations in the Middle East, which I find fascinating. Mitvim is a foreign policy think tank established in 2011 that aims to improve Israel's foreign policy, promote Israel's belonging in the region, and advance Israeli-Palestinian peace. Nadav Wyman is, we are proud to announce, the newly appointed director of Breaking the Silence in Israel. Born and raised in Tel Aviv, he spent his army service as staff sergeant in a snipers team in the special forces of the Nachal Brigade. Breaking the Silence is an organization of veteran soldiers like him who have served in the Israeli military since the start of the Second Intifada and have taken as their mission to expose the Israeli public to the realities of everyday life in the occupied territories. And Rebecca Metzer is the Director of International Relations at Gisha, the Legal Center for Freedom of Movement. Rebecca has previously worked for several Israeli human rights NGOs. She's originally from London, England. She earned her MA in Islamic and Middle Eastern Studies from the Hebrew University. Gisha is an Israeli human rights NGO founded to protect the freedom of movement of Palestinians, which has made this group Israel's leading experts on the Gaza Strip. I also welcome our moderator, Maytal Kowalski, Chair of JSpaceCanada. JSpace is Canada's pro-Israel, pro-peace Zionist advocacy organization, championing a two-state solution for Israel-Palestine. Maytal, I will turn this over to you.
If there is, everyone can hear me? Mic's working? Great. If there is one additional mic, we're fine to share, but if there is one more, that'd be great. I'm going to jump right into business because we're going to end this session precisely at 1:30 at 2:30. So we're just going to jump right in because we've got, as you heard, amazing experts here today. We want to hear from them as much as possible. So this first session, as you saw from your program, has to do with misconceptions and decisions pre-October 7th. And I'm actually going to take us back a little bit further than that even, and say that following the Yom Kippur War, the commission leading the inquiry into the failures of the war coined the term conceptia. And this was the conceptions or misconceptions that led to colossal intelligence and military groupthink that paralyzed Israel leading up to the war and resulted in the horror that was the Yom Kippur War. The same has been proven to be true following the horrific Hamas terror attacks of October 7th on Israel. And I do want to be clear as we go through this discussion that this is not an attempt to blame the victim, but this is rather a crucial and necessary exercise to prevent further attacks, much like any other war inquiry commission. We know that Israel always does have choices, and we see in retrospect that the roads taken, there were roads not taken that could have prevented or mitigated October 7th and the ensuing war. And in fact, all of our speakers on the panel today have been warning for years that these dangerous misconceptions were putting lives at risk. So on that note, I do want to start with exactly that question. So I'm going to ask you all from the perspective of your organization, what were those Israeli policies or decisions that led us in part to the horrific Hamas terror attacks on October 7th and the war that followed? And maybe I'll start with you, Maurizio, and we'll just go down the line.
So thank you very much to all. It is a pleasure and an honor to be here, meeting you and trying to bring our voice to the Canadian Jewish community here. We are Peace Now. We are the longest standing movement for a two-state solution and for public pressure for peace. We pressured for many years for a peace agreement with Egypt. We pressured also for many years for a peace agreement with Jordan. We saw the results yesterday, and we'll keep seeing the results of that even 30 years after. And one of the things I think that after the 7th of October made us clear is that there is no other solution but a two-state solution that will bring finally the security that both Israelis and Palestinians need and require for a better future for everyone in the region. I will just mention a few points of what happened before the 7th of October, not in order to justify or to explain what took us there, but to contextualize and to show the bigger picture and the things that we were announcing and calling for almost every week and every day, so people will really listen to what we have to say. And the truth is since this government, the most pro-settler government in the history of our country, assumed power, one of the only things that they cared is the wellness of the settlement enterprise and the expansion of it. And we released a few months ago a report, an annual report. That's what we do also, and you're all invited to read it, saying that 2023 was without any doubt, I think we can all agree, was the worst year in the history of Israel. But on the other side, it was the best year in the history for the settlements and for the settlement enterprise. And we can show that with numbers, with data. That will just show and bring some numbers. 2023 was the year when most housing units were approved by the government in the history since 1967. Around 12,000 housing units were approved. A dozen of illegal outposts were legalized and turned into settlement. I will just explain the distinction. Settlements are legal under Israeli law, but not under international law. Illegal outposts are illegal under both. And this is a very important matter, and I will explain more after. So dozens of them were legalized, turned into settlements, and even a higher number of outposts were established on that year and were sponsored by our government, a government that is formed by the most extremist people and politicians that our country saw, by Smotrich, Ben-Gvir, Struk, and sponsored and supported by Benjamin Netanyahu, who chose consciously to form this type of government, knowing what will be our future. So this government, instead of focusing on the security of the Israelis, of those who live on the right side of the Green Line, they focus on the security and the well-being of those living on the wrong side of the Green Line. And also, on the 7th of October, we could felt and see how the communities in the South were abandoned by our government and state. And some of those units were staying actually in the West Bank for different reasons. I will call messianic reasons and other things that at the end of the day, they didn't bring any security. They didn't bring anything good for our country. And I must say that now, after 6 months, and I will talk about after also, that is finally our opportunity to choose between having or living in a kingdom, a messianic kingdom of Judea, or living in a democratic and Jewish country, as for sure, everyone wants here to see Israel caring about the nature, the Jewish nature and democratic nature. So I ask you, all of you, to choose. And I think at the end of the day, we all want to choose peace, and we all want to choose security, because as Ben mentioned before, we are 7 million Jews and 7 million Palestinians living on this land, and there is no other way. We'll kill each other or we'll live together. And I believe that most of the people in Israel and Palestine here, we want to live and we want peace, and we'll bring that peace.
Let's just keep going down the line. Yeah.
Sure. I can hear that it's working. I also wanted to say thank you so much for having me here. Linda mentioned at the beginning that hopefully the day will be in some sense hopeful. And I'm sure that many people are feeling a bit puzzled as to how that could possibly be, given the events of not only the last 24 hours, not only the last 6 months, but well before then. And I wanted to say that for me, the hope started the minute that you all walked in, and the fact that everyone came here to have these conversations and tuned in online. It's such a positive step towards bettering the reality in the region that we all live in. And I'm so grateful to have everyone here to have these conversations. So in terms of your question, Maytal, so Gisha is an organization which was founded in 2005. And the founders of Gisha understood that even though Israel was implementing its disengagement plan, whereby it destroyed the settlements in the Gaza Strip, removed its citizens from living in the Gaza Strip, and also removed its boots on the ground, so its military bases and military personnel in the Gaza Strip, This would be far from the end of Israel's relationship with Gaza and far from the end of Israel's control over the Gaza Strip. And for that reason, the founders focused on freedom of movement because they understood that access and freedom of movement was going to be, first of all, a very central means of Israel to implement control over the Gaza Strip, and also the foundation for residents in Gaza to access a whole other host of human rights. So if you're in Gaza and you are able to exercise your freedom of movement, that can mean also your right to livelihood, your right to family life. And unfortunately, in the last 6 months, the right to freedom of movement has become synonymous almost with the right to life and dignity, given the conditions that we've seen developing in Gaza. So what do I think are the policy failures? I think that Israel has always had to balance the need for security with the need to protect human rights and to carry out its policies proportionately and reasonably. And I'm of the opinion that Israel not only failed to secure itself, as we've obviously seen in recent events, but also and separately failed to carry out its security policies in such a way that respected human rights and was proportionate. You'll hear more in my breakout session and also at the end about the kind of period, the current period, but I'll speak a little bit about pre-October 7th and a bit about right after. So before October 7th, Israel pretty much had control over the whole of the Gaza Strip. Israel had control over all of the land crossings except for the crossing with Egypt. And for various reasons, which I'm happy to go into more detail about in future, the Israeli control of those crossings were the most central for sustaining life in Gaza, because the natural markets for Gaza merchants are in Israel and the West Bank, and the majority of people in Gaza who have family outside of Gaza will be family connections in Israel and the West Bank. So travel through Egypt, while also being very irregular and non-transparent, also doesn't help to actually unite Gaza, the West Bank, and Israel, which is exactly the point of Israel's so-called separation policy in order to isolate Gaza. So the people in Gaza were isolated. You could only travel under very strict conditions. And even if you were eligible to travel under those conditions, there was no guarantee that you would actually receive a permit. You were likely to experience what Gisha has termed bureaucratic violence. So not physical violence, but the failure to actually access your rights through means of bureaucracy. So for example, if you're someone who's applying for a permit to visit someone on their deathbed, because that was one of the narrow criterion by which people could travel out of Gaza, was to visit what's called a first-degree family member, so parent, child, sibling, who's on their deathbed. We had many cases at Gisha where we provide legal aid for people to access those rights in the Israeli legal system. Cases where, unfortunately, because of non-responses or arbitrary blocks, someone who's applied for a permit to visit someone on their deathbed has actually not been able to visit that person before they've passed away. So that's just one example of the kind of bureaucratic violence. Israel also through its control of the crossings, also has massive control over the economy in the Gaza Strip, and by extension, the entire Palestinian economy, which, while fragmented, is one economy, remains so. So Israel, for example, controls what goes in and out of the Gaza Strip. So that meant that Israel has control over, up until 2010, Gisha has revealed that there was, through Freedom of Information requests, that there was in fact a calorific calculation happening about how much food should be let into the Gaza Strip in order to keep people on a subsistence level, which is obviously not being met currently, but not on a level where they would be food flowing in the markets, but on a level that they wouldn't be starving to death, which is obviously what we're seeing now. After that, Israel implemented its dual use policy. So rather than have all goods be banned, except for specific ones, it was the inverse. But the dual use policy, which is a policy which says that items which can be used for both civilian and military purposes have to be vetted extra by the Israelis, is massively higher than the internationally recognized standard. And in practice, there are items which never get to go in. Israel also controls what goes out of the Gaza Strip. So, for example, which agricultural items can be marketed outside Gaza. Israel also has control over Gaza's airspace. It bombed the airport in 2001 and prevented another one from being built. By controlling the, obviously all coordination with Israel has to happen in order for any aircrafts to go into Gaza's airspace. And by extension, because of its control over the airspace, Israel also controls the electromagnetic space in Gaza. So Gaza is kept on a 2G connectivity, whereas Israel itself is on 5G, West Bank is on 3G, Gaza is kept on 2G. And finally, because I know that we don't have all the time in the world, Israel also controls the sea space in Gaza. So there's a designated fishing zone, which is below what was promised in the Oslo Accords. And if anyone is seen to be venturing outside of the fishing zone, they can face live fire, or they can face having their boats confiscated temporarily. And even during this 6 months warfare, Israel has tried to go above and beyond what it used to do, which was temporarily confiscate fishing boats and actually apply for permits to destroy fishing boats, to permanently confiscate them, even during these atrocities that we're seeing and the obvious humanitarian catastrophe. And Israel also has prevented a seaport from being built in Gaza. So additional to all of this, and now that I hope I've laid some context as to how Israel actually has so much control over Gaza, the policies in the immediate aftermath, which you also asked about, Maytal, involved a complete siege on the Gaza Strip. So for the first 2 weeks of the war, since from October 7th to October 21st, nothing was allowed to pass into Gaza. This already laid the foundations for the humanitarian catastrophe. There's no way now that we see Israel's authorities talking about recent stepping up of aid, for example. If a siege began on October 7th, there's no way for this crisis to be addressed during a wartime because of how deep-seated it's now become. So the first 2 weeks, as I mentioned, nothing came in until mid-November. No fuel was allowed to go in whatsoever. I'll talk more later on about why fuel is so important, but it's just important for me to say now that fuel is very essential to the humanitarian response and to civilian life in Gaza. Nothing went in until mid-November by Israeli policy. Only in mid-December did Israel open any of its crossings with the Gaza Strip. So I would say that all of those policies, we've seen already that they didn't guarantee security, and the cost to human life, including both casualties and human suffering, has been incredible. It's hard to overstate. So I think that policy of basically closure was an Israeli failing.
Yes. Thank you very much for inviting me. And really, it is so encouraging to see.
Basic assumptions basically collapsed, which is a major obstacle, but also a major opportunity. Now with the help of
Now can you? Oh, great, terrific. I'm going to save some voice. We have other one later on in Vancouver, so maybe this is a smarter choice. But if I have to choose maybe two major paradigms that collapsed, per your question, I will start with yesterday, actually, with tonight, if you speak in Israeli terms. You know, we had a never-ending discussion within think tankers, within policy planners, which threat is the worst for Israel's future? The Iranian threat or the Israeli-Palestinian? You know, this never-ending discussion. We were all wrong. They are intertwined. The only thing we share with the Israeli government is our resistance to the two-state solution. Great quote. a Republican member of Congress, some Nar Gvaot, a radical settler. No, it's the foreign minister of Iran who said that. We understand today that in order to engage in an effective fight for the survival of Israel, really, vis-a-vis Iran, we have to promote an Israeli-Palestinian settlement. There's a direct link between them. When we start a humanitarian crisis in Gaza, starvation in Gaza, that reflects on the rage in the Arab world and obviously open the door for Iran. When we strengthen the Hamas, basically, bribing Hamas and chewing or causing the moderates to become weaker and weaker, the PA, we open the door for Hamas. When we destroy the fabric of Israeli-US relations, with Israel relations with the Western world, we open the road for Hamas. So this is basically intertwined and connected. And I think this is a growing understanding within, I would even say, the Israeli public about the connection between these two things. But that connects me to, I would say, a lost decade in Israeli diplomacy. And here we are talking about Netanyahu's legacy when it comes to conflict management. This idea that there is no need or there's no choice, basically, and there's no reason to promote any initiative. We can just go idly by and not do anything, basically, on promoting Israeli-Palestinian peace or on any political level. I wouldn't call it even conflict management. It's anti-solutionism, really. The decision not to make a decision, a strategy of not having a strategy. Now, Meital mentioned the 73 and the conception, really. That was basically a conception that you can write off as a conceptual, an honest mistake in understanding the other side. Here we are talking about a politically motivated policy. It was very comfortable for this Israeli Netanyahu government to continue with this conflict management because in many ways it allows them to keep the separation between the West Bank and Gaza. It allowed them to continue with creeping annexation without making great statements. And that's what we actually experienced in the last decade. And I'll say this, one of the first conceptual victims of the 7th of October is the conflict management approach. We see it in surveys. We are now being pushed, when we lost the ability to shape reality, we left the initiative to the other side, we are now pushed into a crucial crossroad. No more stalling for time, no more buying time. On the one hand, on the one side, there's the abyss. There's the Smotrich plan, decisive victory, if you know this one. A plan that talks about erasing any sign of Oslo, of a two-state solution, making it absolutely impossible. How do they define it? To encourage the migration of Gazans from Gaza to Egypt. That's what we see on the right side of the map, and this is a ready-made plan, waiting to be implemented. On the other side, what we are trying to create today is an alternative, and this is what I'm going to discuss later on, a roadmap that take this situation that we are at, and we're basically trying to utilize it in a gradual process, first of all, shifting from warfare into the phase of political action, and all the way through a very gradual process of building statehood into the resumption of negotiation on the Israeli-Palestinian regional level. And that's at least part of what we are trying to create today. But I will be remiss if I'll just throw you one of those Churchill quotes, the greater the crisis, the greater the opportunity. That's true. I agree with that. And I don't know if Churchill said that. Everything is affiliated with Churchill. But yeah, I have no idea. But it feels right. It's Oscar Wilde, Stalin, or Churchill, right? But I will be remiss because you can't speak about what we are experiencing right now, I think, is an opportunity. What we are experiencing, this crucial crossroad, is a piece of no choice. We used to speak about war of no choice, 73, 67. What we are experiencing right now is a piece of no choice, a specific crossroad, an outcome of this decade, paying basically the prices for a decade of inaction and paralysis. And we have only two choices. So what we are going to try to do today, a little bit also later on, is to a little bit zoom in and discuss the things that are working for us. One thing that I can say that is working for us, and this is another paradigm that collapsed, and this is not an Israeli paradigm that collapsed, it is a paradigm that is that resides in Canada, in the US, in other places. We all used to speak about how we support Israeli-Palestinian peace. That's part of our vector, our set of values, absolutely. But what we're experiencing right now is a completely different level of a sense of urgency. The understanding that the shock waves of what's going on in Gaza will be felt, are felt, not just in Jerusalem, Beirut, Damascus, Baghdad, but across the Mediterranean, in Berlin, in Kiev, by the way, in DC. If you speak about turnout with your neighbors in Michigan, the voter turnout in specific states. So it's no longer just a question of a general support. It is about the core interests of our communities. And this also presents a specific opportunity for a different level of involvement. So I'll just stop here and we'll pick it up, I'm sure, later on.
Hi, hello everyone. Thanks for our host for giving us this stage. And I've got to say before saying one thing about Gaza, we are here, I don't know if I speak for all of us, but I think I do. We are here because I want ceasefire, I want our hostages to be released, and I want humanitarian aid inside Gaza and to end this war. And that's the reason. And that's the reason that we as Israeli have to speak out about what we are doing in Gaza, but also in the West Bank for the past 56 years. So for a question, we're an organization that does a lot of political education. We guide tours, we had lectures, briefings all across Israel, but also just finished a couple of weeks in the US and now over here. And we speak with pre-military academies and youth movement and high schools and open public and kibbutzniks and Jewish congregation and diplomats and journalists and whoever wants to listen. And our message is quite simple. As ex-soldiers, we know how the occupation is immoral, illegal, and how bad it is for Israelis and Palestinians, and we have to end it, not today, like years ago. And as somebody that deals with a lot of political education, I used to be a high school teacher for literature and history before being a political activist. So, Linda, I think you started with something that is very common over here in Canada, to recognize who lived here, right, before us. What was before Toronto, that was Toronto. And in Israel, it's not like that. You know that in Israel, there is, in every classroom, next to the board, you have to have the flag of Israel, the national anthem, the photo of the president, and a map of Israel without the green line, by law, without the green line and without Palestinian cities and towns. So when you look at the map as a kid in Israel, and this is how you grow up, by the way, Israel looks like an island, right? We don't really see the rest of the world. And Palestinians, they don't exist over there. And if they don't exist, it's not a problem, right? So I think recognizing that we are occupying Palestinians for the past 56 years by military regime with soldiers just like I was, I think that's the first step, right? Thank you. Like small something. After October 7th, that was horrible, horrible, horrible in Israel. We in Breaking the Silence, we lost testifiers that were murdered on the kibbutzes on the Gaza border, and also our supporters, and an amazing couple that hosted Breaking the Silence staff a couple of weeks before October 7th in their home. Yochke and Oded were abducted by Hamas. Yochke was released. Oded is still in captivity. After that happened, immediately what me, and by the way, my two older brothers with me, went down south to volunteer with all of the evacuees and with a lot of the Bedouin unrecognized villages in the south that don't have any shelter. 7-year-old girl was injured last night from one of the missiles. And over there, on October 8th, 9th, 10th, you met so many people coming to volunteer in the south. Was really, really moving. And I had lots of conversation with soldiers, police, and border police that fought on October 7th and October 8th. And I told all of them, listen, I'm from Breaking the Silence. Nobody cared, by the way, back then. But they all started to ask me questions, you know, while giving them coffee and food and things like that. They said, what's going on in Gaza? Why they hate us? Who rules Gaza? They had so many questions about Gaza because between Israel and Gaza, there's an invisible curtain that nobody can see inside. And when you don't think about them and you don't see them, it's easier to do everything we're doing now. Okay, and what we did for the past 56 years. So we talked about, you said about, talked about conceptions, right? So we believe that there were two main conceptions that led to the October 7th. Now, Gil just talked about one of them, right? Managing the conflict, right? We can give Palestinian humanitarian relief, couple of trucks with burgul and rice. They would have to deal with, you know, surviving, and they won't fight us. Collapsed very bloodily and in a horrific way on October 7th. But the other one is that we have superiority. in weapons and technology. On the morning of October 7th, we had about 400 soldiers around the Gaza Strip and less than 10 tanks. You know how many soldiers were on October 7th in the West Bank? 32,000 soldiers. And that's the priority of our government, right? Just as Mauricio said, settlers before everything else, right? Because think about the border with Gaza, and now think about the border around every settlement and in every unauthorized outpost and every isolated house in an unauthorized outpost, okay? And every time settlers are doing horrible things, beating up Palestinians, cutting down olive trees, like we saw in the pogroms in the last couple of days, we IDF soldiers, I did it the same, have to protect them, right? And not protecting Israel or our borders. And a part of that conception of web superiority was technology, right? Around the Gaza Strip, we had automatic vehicles, we had cameras, sensors, and all of that made us believe that because we're managing the conflict, right? We don't need soldiers on the ground, right? We can expand our settlement enterprise, and we can do all of that. And that crumbled horrifically. I'm sure everybody read what was Hamas' first move, right? They saw us. They had years of planning it. So they knocked down all of the cameras and what in the IDF we call ro'a yora, you see or shoot, the female observers on the border that can operate machine guns from afar, right? And then raided the bases and took out communications. And basically the IDF was blind and deaf on October 7th, right? Because they had all of the time in the world because we were building settlements. Now, the difference between Gaza and the West Bank is that in the West Bank, we have settlements. We have roadblocks, we have checkpoints, we have patrols, we have the army over there, right? So it's occupation with the settler movement inside. In Gaza, after the disengagement in 2005, by the way, I fought in Gaza in 2008, and then again in 2012 as a reservist. Okay, we disengaged in 2005, but we started sieging Gaza, right? So it was occupation by siege, right? Like Rebecca explained it. But also every couple of years, a very big operation with a lot of Palestinian casualties and Israeli casualties, right? And every year it became harder and harder, right? We had Cast Lead in 2009, and then Protective Edge in 2014, and now this, right? And every time you have more Palestinians dead, more Israelis, civilians, and soldiers, right, dying, and no solution, right? I don't know quotes and all of that, but only a crazy man will do the same thing over and over again and think about yeah, Einstein, I know. Or Churchill, right? Right? So it's not a circle of violence with Gaza. It's a spiral, okay? Because in every operation, you need more firepower. And the red line, the last thing you did in an operation, it's the beginning line for the next operation. For example, 2014, the last thing that we did, we knocked down a 14-story house in Rimal neighborhood in Gaza from the air. And everybody was like, whoa. And I was really amazed. And this is how we started the next operation in 2021, Black Belt. And all of that are leading us to the same point, right? We, Israel, we, the IDF, looks at Gaza Strip as a military problem. And because of that, it needs a military solutions, right? More missiles, but it's not a military problem, right? And that's what we in Breaking the Silence are asking from our leadership. A policy plan, 2-state, 1-state, federation, confederation. There's so many things on the table, right? The Saudi initiative. But if we will continue doing this, right? Doing this, fighting in Gaza, pulling out, then fighting in Gaza. So I don't think October 7th would happen again, right? In this magnitude, but people would die, would continue to die, and we won't have peace in Israel.
Can I break protocol just a second and add to what Nadav said, that we are working very closely with the IDF, with the thinking organizations of the IDF, let's call it, and the National Security Council and so on. And of course, this stays in this room and whoever is at home, so it's not really secret anymore, but we get direct request from the IDF, from those who are doing the military act in Gaza. Give us or help us get some kind of a political directive, because we have exhausted the military operation. Rafah, not Rafah. You know, we are right now in the place that we are yearning for some kind of guidance, because we understand that nothing else can be done on the military level. So just really supporting your really important work on that level.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Good luck, everyone, picking just one breakout session after this. So just because we do want to stay on time, I did ask that first question of all four panelists. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask a couple more questions, but just whoever feels best equipped or best wants to answer them, go for it. And then if someone else wants to respond really quickly, go ahead. But we do obviously want to get through a few more questions. So thank you all for those incredibly in-depth answers from various perspectives. Really, really interesting, really helpful. Of course, the focus was on Israeli policy, Israeli governmental decisions, and military decisions. I do want to push just a little bit and ask, when you talk about Nadav, you specifically mentioned, like, as Israelis, it's on us, therefore, to speak out against what our leaders are doing, what our government is doing. But there are leaders on the other side. There is the PA, there is Hamas. We see that in neither the West Bank nor in Gaza have we seen an election since either of those two governing bodies were elected. There is obviously some agency there, right? There's differences. We're talking about a sovereign state versus a civilian population that is stateless, but there are governing bodies. So I just want to ask, that pushback of, well, look, like, Hamas is a terrorist organization on Israel's border. There are credible terrorist security threats from the occupied West Bank. What is the responsibility, to the extent that you feel comfortable talking about it, or maybe even pushing back on my question if you'd like, but what do we need to demand, or what is the responsibility of either the PA under Mahmoud Abbas currently, or reforms that need to be made, and obviously the same for Hamas and different decisions that could have been made knowing that there's a terrorist entity on your border? Whoever wants to grab that one first.
The think taker always have to go first, so yeah. No, I mean, look, I mean, 7th of October happened in a very crucial juncture in the history of Israeli-Palestinian conflict. When the cliche about the day after Abu Mazen becomes a reality. I don't know how many of you have been to Ramallah lately, but they don't speak about Abu Mazen as a lame duck, but as a dead duck. I mean, we are right now in a crucial point when it comes to shaping our relations, and this is Israelis' international system, with what would, this mystery about who's going to become the emerging leadership of the PA. And many people speak about the PA in relation to Gaza, the return of the PA to Gaza. But we have to understand the situation of the PA right now after a decade of structural abuse, I would say, from the Israeli side. And, people speak about reforms, and people speak about their security capacity, and those are all, very relevant questions. But the crisis of the PA today is not a crisis of capacity, if you ask me. It's a crisis of legitimacy, basic legitimacy. So part of our responsibility in this process is to really rebuild the legitimacy of the PA. Now, that would never happen if the PA would come back to Gaza under Israeli bayonets. The only way it could happen is if we allow it to develop its internal legitimacy, and as part of a broader political pathway or a political plan that leads to the establishment of a demilitarized, peaceful Palestinian state. Otherwise, it won't work. We won't be able to get the support, the crucial support of regional actors. We didn't speak about the region, but this is a very important thing. And of course, you won't create the public changes, basically, that comes with it. Now, that does not mean that we don't need to deal with reforms. Reforms in the security apparatus, reforms in the economic system of the PA, reforms in education, maybe the key issue of de-radicalization. When I speak about de-radicalization, I speak about mutual de-radicalization, apropos, in Israel and in Palestine. But that's definitely something that we should address in the coming year. And I will say that rebuilding the PA capacity and legitimacy in the West Bank starts from practice, not just with historical handshakes and with some kind of a political horizon. It starts with the tachlis, with acts on the ground, with taking actions that would provide state capacity, with stopping settlement expansion, with things that are sounding really boring, but God really is in the details here, such as approving master plans for Palestinian towns in Area C, 60% of the West Bank. Issues that are about building the statehood of the Palestinian state I would say bottom up and top down in a combination. So that's my $72,000 answer to your $1 million question about the PA.
Does anyone want to respond and round that up to $1 million? Nadav, go ahead.
So first of all, Gil just mentioned sea territory. So 60% of the West Bank is sea territories. The IDF is in charge of security and civilian issues. The PA is out of the question over there. And over there, we have 128 settlements, 140 unauthorized outposts, and 550,000 Israelis, but also 300,000 Palestinians, right? All of the pogroms that we saw in the last 48 hours in the West Bank happened over there in sea territories, where Palestinian police cannot protect Palestinians, right? And even more than that, when me and my unit, when we did operations in Ramallah, we took over the headquarters of the Palestinian intelligence. So there is an officer in the IDF, in the civil administration, that gives a call to an officer, a Palestinian officer, and tells him, take your police officers away. We call it lekapel shopim. Lekapel, it's like when you fold laundry. Okay, so to fold Palestinian police. Okay, and I've got to say that when I was a soldier, we did a couple of operations that Palestinian police was a legitimate target after 7 or 9 p.m. if they walk with their long weapons, with their Kalashnikovs. Okay, so we see them as our enemy, right? And we deal the IDF in the West Bank as like they are subcontractors for arresting Palestinians inside A and B territories, and that's not in all of the cases. 98% of the operations that I did as a combat soldier in special forces were in A and B territories, not in C. Okay, this is where I spent most of my time. And I can say that right, if we want the PA to have the power to govern Palestinians, it needs to be visible, right? When Palestinians are attacked, their homes are being burnt, even being murdered in the last 48 hours, they have no one to protect them. The IDF, it says in our protocol that we have to protect Palestinians just like we're protecting Israelis because we're the sovereign power of the West Bank. It doesn't really happen. I don't know if you saw the very important video of Yesh Din, one of our partner organizations from yesterday, where you can see settlers burning a Palestinian car and an IDF soldiers protect them, just standing next to them. They burn the car, and then he continues protecting them along the way. When Palestinians are seeing that, so the PA has no power, right? It's basically nothing over there. And I forgot to say that when one of the new trends that we uncover with our testimonies in the last couple of years, it's that settlers are starting to have special prayers or visitation to all Jewish graves, quote unquote, only in A territories and only in the middle of Palestinian villages. That it may be a mosque that they say that 4,000 years ago it was a synagogue. Now, I'm not an archaeological expert, but it only started to happen in the last couple of years. And when it happens, you need a lot of IDF soldiers to close the area and to physically push Palestinian police. Now think about a Palestinian man that sees that in front of his eyes. What do you think about the PA after that, right? And that's a trend that, again, because of our extreme right-wing government, Benjamin Netanyahu and all of that, yes. But still, think about the long repercussion of that education to Palestinians when they see this.
I know you didn't want everyone to speak, but I feel obligated to add a word on Gaza as well. I think you're right that what we as Israeli civil society organizations, our mandate is obviously to hold our government to account. But I think it's really important to add the context of that, which is what we are facing is a total disavowal of Israel's obligations and responsibilities to civilians, particularly civilians in Gaza. So it's very, very easy to push and shift responsibility onto other actors. And I spoke before about how I would mention Egypt. And the fact is, Egypt has third state responsibilities over Gaza. But Israel, because of everything that we've described, this occupation by remote control that both Nadav and I talked about, Israel has responsibilities over Gaza as an occupying power. And currently responsibilities over Gaza civilians as a party to hostilities. And I'll give a personal anecdote. My grandmother, she lives in Jerusalem. I hope she's not watching, but if you are, hi, Grandma. She says, we speak on the phone, and she says to me, I don't understand. 1 minute, they're attacking us from Gaza, and the next minute, they want us to give them flour. And that's genuinely the perception that she receives from the Israeli news cycle. that first of all, Israel is providing aid, which it's not, although as an occupying power, it does have the obligation to do so. But second of all, that there's no understanding of what it is, the control that Israel exerts that actually creates those obligations. All they see in the news cycle, all we see in the Israeli news cycle is the ways in which we are victims. And it's true, there is a terrorist organization that has power in the Gaza Strip up until now. But we don't see the ways that we exercise control and the ways that we actually have these obligations. And especially we're going to see that now in the coming period. What we're seeing in Gaza now is this total vacuum of responsibility over these civilians, because rightly or wrongly, Israel does not entrust Hamas with to kind of carry out actions in the interests of the civilians, doesn't trust we've seen that the Ministry of Health in Gaza is brought into question by the Israeli authorities, etc. Israel also has a massive campaign of delegitimizing UNRWA. UNRWA is the backbone of the humanitarian response in Gaza. Even before October 7th, 80% of the Gaza Strip was to an extent dependent on humanitarian aid. UNRWA is essential for distributing that aid. Israel doesn't, for various political reasons, delegitimizes UNRWA. Nadav talked about targeting of PA police. Well, Hamas police is now also a target, and the aid convoys aren't able to go through because there's no police to protect them. So with all of these other actors being delegitimized, Israel itself is also not ready to take responsibility for those civilians in Gaza. So while your question, I think, is legitimate, it's that I wanted to give the context of why we as Israeli civil society think that the most central question is about our obligations.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll just add something very short, but I think this is something important and critical. We are always asking that question, okay, so what about the other side? What about the Palestinians? What about them? They want to kill us all. They want to exterminate us. They want to send us back to Europe or whatever else. And I think, of course, you have these people on the other side, but I think we need to look also to our side and see and understand what we are doing that is strengthening the extremism on the other side. And the reality is that our government, this current government, and also governments before, declared, and this is part of the coalition agreement between the Likud party and the religious Zionist party of Smotrich, that says that the Jewish people has an exclusive right on the whole land of Israel, from the Galilee, the Negev, Judea, and Samaria. And when you have a government that announced that, and not only in words, but also in actions, because this is what the government did for this whole year, and also before this is a process, the process of annexation is something that is happening for many years already. It intensified in the last year, but it is happening, and it is a reality. And it is something that we cannot allow ourselves to keep ignoring and to keep saying, okay, it will be fine. We'll get to that moment that in the future we'll need to sit with our counterpart and start to discuss what we can do. We need to stop that now. We need to do and to create awareness that this is a main issue. The risk of an annexation of Area C, that is at 60% of the Palestinian territory in the West Bank. This is a real danger for our security as Israelis, and is a real danger for Palestinians and for their security as well, and for the right of self-determination. So if we want a government in the future, and I'm 100% sure that the Israeli people will oust this government, and we will get a government that will bring us really the path and a choice for a better future. I think that at that moment, we'll see that the other side automatically, they will create and will be people, the most moderate branches. Okay. So the most moderate branches on the Palestinian side, if it's the PA, if it's another movement, if it's the same people of different people, those will follow us. And we'll get into some kind of understanding, and that's where everything will begin. So till that day, we'll need to keep talking, and we'll need to keep doing what every organization, NGO in Israel is doing to stop that and to take us to that place that in the future will bring us some kind of hope that we need so much.
Thank you all for being very Israeli and not listening to my instructions at all speaking. So with that, I'm going to ask the final question, and I think we may only have time for one or two of you to answer. But I want to kind of tie in everything that we're going to talk about today. So we're also going to be talking about Canada's involvement, obviously. And I want to tie in, obviously, the events of yesterday with Iran. And I think it was actually your organization, Peace Now, Shalom Achshav, had a great tweet earlier today. That was a picture of King Abdullah and Rabin, and making the point that, you know, diplomatic relationships and negotiations are what bring peace. Because if you think about what we saw yesterday, I mean, Jordan protecting Israeli airspace, like that, you know, that is incredible. Like we cannot dismiss what that means for the change of the region, the differences in the region. Yet, you know, we have seen successive Netanyahu governments kind of dismiss Western allies, say we don't need them, we don't need the US. We saw the famous election campaign poster that Netanyahu had of him and Putin shaking hands that said Liga Acheret, like a whole different league. So I want to ask, you know, if you can, if very quickly, if you can tie in, you know, thinking about us as Western allies, thinking about what we saw yesterday with the attacks from Iran, can you talk a little bit about the relationship with Western allies and the Netanyahu government, how he framed it, what it actually is, and what we should learn from yesterday that kind of feeds into those misconceptions?
I'm starting this time. Yeah. So it was, I forgot to say, it was crazy to be over here, Luis and I. For working silence, we just took a flight from JFK, and then I read online that the drones are on the way. I'm talking with my wife, you know, my kids in Tel Aviv, like what you're going to do, because we don't have a shelter. We live in an old house. It felt like sci-fi, living in a sci-fi movie, right? But it was really amazing to see the coalition, right, around us that stopped it. You know, thinking about Jordanian Air Force fighting to protect Israelis, it's an amazing thought. But I want to speak about your neighbors, the Biden administration, and you can see that the ground is a little bit shaking in Israel, right? I'm a part of Breaking Science for 12 years. I'm doing the lectures for the past 12 years. To speak with Israelis about settler violence was something like, it was very, very, very hard. People don't want to hear about it, right? And then a couple of months ago, Biden said Israelis and sanctions in the same sentence, and poof, everybody's talking about settler violence, right? Why? Because the bubble burst. Israelis understood there isn't no impunity anymore, right? And yes, it was only 4 settlers, right? I know all of them. By the way, I know one of them too good, right? Yinon Levy from the South Urban Hills area, right? All of us, all of the activists, we know him very good. But I can say that I don't think he had the plans to come to visit the States, and now that he don't have a visa, it really hurt him. But the settler movement, like, the ground shook. And for Israelis, the ground shook. And that was super important because it influenced the internal Israeli discussion about settlements, or the legality of settlements, or let crazy settlers do what they want in our backyard. And then there was a wave, right? The British government, the French government, right? Your government said, we're not going to sell arms to Israel anymore, right? So I'm not a member of the BDS movement, right? When I do lectures in Europe, the BDS protest against me because I'm an Israeli soldier. And I don't like us to be boycott, right? But I think that, just like in the 90s, we needed our friends around the world to help us to do peace, right? To push us over there, in the 70s before that. We need our friends, our Western friends around the world to tell us, okay, that's too much. Okay, listen to us. And we can see it now. So I think that as this war would progress, or maybe the Biden administration would do more steps against settler violence, we would see more good results on the ground. Again, not because of boycott, because of shedding a light on a real problem.
We have time for one more person can speak to it. Do you wanna go? You seem very excited to go.
Yeah. So my baby sister gave birth 2 days ago, and that's it. Actually, all I wanted to say. No, kidding. But no, she was born on the eve of the first attack of the Gulf War, so she always have terrific timing, you know. But she asked me, they were, of course, with this in the hospital, all is good, and she asked me, "Wow, this Biden, after everything we done, after this government basically the things that the Israeli government did, in the last few months, really, using Netanyahu doing the classic switcheroo and using Biden in order to strengthen his own message to his own constituency and so on and so forth. But the separation, the Israeli understanding, I think, in this conflict, unlike in different rounds of escalation, that there is real distinction in the administration, the Biden administration today, between, as Harris mentioned, by the way, to Gantz, and not to Netanyahu, between supporting the government of Israel, which they obviously do not, and being committed to the security and safety of Israelis. This is something that Israelis starting to understand about the strategic relation. They also, I think, one of the lessons from yesterday, and Israelis would never admit it, I'm already going to save you the pain and suffering, that we do not have the capacity to deal, as we say, kachol lavan, based on our own independent capacities with the strategic threats that are currently facing Israel, especially when it comes to Iran. So yes, it's Jordan, but it's mostly the US and regional partners. But even regarding regional partners, what we see today, the classic script by Netanyahu was, hey, we don't need the Palestinian issue because we have peace for peace. We were able to defeat the left-wing claim, and now we have an alliance with regional partners, the Abraham Accords, which does not involve anything related to the region. Now, we at Mitvim, we always play the classic role of the party poopers in all those normalization parties for the last 3 years, saying, hey, you have to have an Israeli-Palestinian component. You have to leverage normalization with the Arab world in order to promote Israeli-Palestinian peace for the sake of normalization and also for the sake of peace on that level. What I think we are experiencing right now is a moment of reckoning regarding this issue. Today, when we speak about future normalization with the Saudis, or even the continuation of the normalization with the Emiratis, these are the partners that we are working with at Mitvim, the price is completely different. It's no longer the fig leaf of, if you remember, promising to stop annexation or some kind of small little gesture. It's the Arab Peace Initiative. And that's good news because it provides us with a new momentum. The normalization process, you mentioned different league. The entire regional project of Israel, the normalization project, is not a left-wing project. It's a center right, and even right. So that it has a certain leverage if we can utilize it properly. Yeah, that's about it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, so yes, please. So we are just about to wrap up here. If you don't have a program in front of you, or if you need to know where you're going, I don't know either, so hold on. So we're going to have a break for about 15 minutes. Our breakouts are going to start at 2:45. If you want to hear Mauricio speak about resisting de facto annexation, promoting the two-state solution, Peace Now's visions and actions toward a better path forward, that is in the Porter Room. Gil is staying in this main room, presenting the Israeli Initiative, a roadmap for long-term security. Rebecca will be in the Alexandra room just across the hall, myths and facts about Gaza, the past, the present, and how we move forward. And in the Wood room, we have Nadav, and also who you didn't hear today, or didn't hear in this session, but will be with him there, which is Luis, both from Breaking the Silence. And they're talking about how we fought in Gaza. Israel must rethink its military strategy. Take some time. You have 15 minutes, washroom break, water outside, and we'll see you all in your breakout rooms. Thank you so much.